Good day and welcome to the Startup Leader Show, where we learn lessons from leading startup founders and executives. I'm your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, Jim Keravala. He is the founder and CEO of OffWorld. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you, Lisa. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for making the time for this. And maybe we can start by having you just give a little bit of background on yourself and OffWorld.
Sure. So I come from a 30-year history in the space sector, starting off on launch and satellite design, and then after about 12 to 15 years, moving into the entrepreneurial side in order to try and establish larger programs with more infrastructure and business metrics in space. And over the last 7 years, my team at OffWorld has been building machine intelligent robots that operate in swarms for industrial applications such as mining, construction, infrastructure repair, and other sectors. And when those intelligence layers are mature and the platform is matured, we'll deploy in space to the lunar surface and beyond so that we can establish civilization out into the solar system.
Oh, geez. Well, that sounds like a big goal to have in mind there. And so, how have things been going so far?
You know, uh, at, at Offworld, things have really been going amazingly, and I use those words without exaggeration. Uh, we built our company without investment, only on customer revenue, with anchor clients in the mining sector, where we're able to develop these very advanced robots built around a modular platform that can undertake excavation, processing, transport of material, and then have us um, use those modular robots to then apply to different sectors. Now, the premise of that has been very compelling to heavy industry. So that has allowed our company to grow significantly and rapidly. And yet, the hypothesis of what we proposed at the start back in 2015, when we really first brought this together, was way ahead of its time and ahead of the technology curve. So it's quite remarkable that we managed to kick off the company without investment and grow it steadily. We've now expanded into several continents with team growth, and we're probably doubling in size this year. Bringing on maybe another 100 employees. We just got new facilities in Pasadena, former JPL building, actually, where the Voyager 1 and 2 missions were mission controlled from. So a very prestigious building that is now the latest off-world facility. So things are going well. New species of robots being developed, setting up manufacturing and expanding distribution and deployment channels.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that just brings up so many questions for me. It sounds like you're probably able to take some of the human risk factor out of some of these industries that really have a huge, that are risky in terms of mining and that sort of thing. Is that really the case?
So it's a great question. The one of the bounding origins of our architecture was that in for our space-based operations, ideally we want no people present doing repetitive tasks in space. We want no fixed infrastructure. Let's limit the use of consumables
Mhm.
and be very, very careful to not disturb the environment and leave environmental chaos, especially when you're in environments with regolith and low gravity fields. Now, you take those four constraints or bounding points and bring that down to terrestrial market-based operations. It turns out to be a capex and opex blockbuster for
Mhm.
mining, construction, and other heavy industries. So when we take people completely out of harm's way, So our robots operate without people present, not even requiring teleoperations. They work in excuse me, constrained, unstructured environments, but with very narrow task fields. But because we're on a modular platform, we have multiple species of robots collaborating together like swarms of large ants. Um, and that enables us to take people right out of harm's way, which completely changes the safety and quality of life and rights of humanity issues. And in fact, although our originating driver was the expansion of humanity into the solar system, into the stars, one of the consequential mandates that Offworld has developed basically by what we're doing is the ending of the last 10,000 years of forced labor and slavery for heavy manual labor. And I think this is an elevation of the human condition, especially when we're also deeply concerned and involved in the social contract. So, what do those people who are displaced from traditional manual labor jobs do in this new automated economy? Uh,
Mhm.
because over the last 200 years plus, we see displacement shifts generation by generation as new technologies and processes emerged.
Right.
And frankly, they've always been, I think they've always been under the threshold of a critical population displacement mass, um, where the generation can kind of recover. There is pain, there is displacement, but the generation holds firm.
Mhm.
In this age of autonomy, machine intelligence, I think the shifts will be way beyond that threshold. So we're looking at major social disruption, discontent, and unemployment if we don't also work the social contract in harmony with these new opportunities so that everyone gets involved, everyone can benefit from new education, new entrepreneurial and employment opportunities.
Wow, I'm just so incredibly excited to hear about initiatives like yours where there really is a very clear ESG, initiative or focus. So just that sounds really great. As you've gone through the process of building Offworld, what would you say have been some of the biggest keys to your success so far?
I think the biggest is it really starts with oneself, and this might sound a little precious, but getting over your own assumptions. Uh, it, in order to be driven by a cause or a mission, as myself and many of my fellow co-founders and team members are, um, one needs a certain amount of ego drive. Some of my team members may say rampant narcissism, but the trick is to recognize where your strengths are, where your
Mhm,
weaknesses are, where how good is your judgment, how do you deal with decision making, and then build up enough experience to remember and learn from the decisions you made in the past and the outcomes associated with those decisions, and
mhm,
build up that internal database of um, your own interaction with the universe. Because it's actually ironic. As you can see, I'm a little bit of a bookworm, always have been. But what you can't learn from books, or even externally shared experience, is your own execution in the face of decisions in the moment. Because
mhm,
you never have all the information you need, and you have to make judgment calls. And judgment calls is based on your character, your nature, and then your experience. And really, that is a learning curve that you have to go through, make mistakes on, figure out those data points, and be open and honest with yourself about where your weaknesses are and where uh, your strengths lie. And again, it leads to another cliche: always bring in team members who are better than yourself. Um,
sure.
and as as I went through that analysis, I can. It's very fair to say that it was a very easy process for me to do, because the number of gaps I do have personally are quite significant, and so the team members that we have are just out of this world. They're off world, um, but they really are excellent, and they really are. the source of the success of the company.
That sounds amazing. When you think about the business, what would you say have been the most valuable business lessons that you've learned over the years?
From 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 my particular context, which was how do we build a business beyond geostationary Earth orbit facing outwards, where no real market forces yet exist, no customers really exist.
Mhm.
The early assumptions I made was that everyone or anyone I could pin down to listen to my spiel would be influenced and motivated by the cause for the betterment of humanity. And then that philanthropic or cause driven motivation would create a bridge to economic and free market dynamics that would then kick off a self sustaining, expanding economy.
Mhm.
There are a lot of people of high net worth, organizations with resources that do communicate a resonance with that cause and mission. But I think the biggest lesson I learned was however much that occurs, that you get that resonance of sentiment. The bottom line is if you don't have customers, if you don't have revenue, and it doesn't have to necessarily be immediate, but it can't be more than 12, 24 months away, really.
Yeah.
Um, what you if you don't have that, what you will be is, and there's value in this as well, is a a potential grant-based company seeking grants, a research or development company, excuse me, and there is a lot of value in that.
Mhm.
But if you're trying to create a whole new economy and a whole new expansion of civilization outwards, you really do need to employ um, and engage channels to transactions that involve the whole global community. So we need to open up economy, create supply chains and value chains that um, span from initial resource provider all the way to end user. And
Mhm.
that only happens by robust market dynamics and transaction economics, customers basically. And it can't be just a few customers. It can't be a government end user. It has to be individual end users that are part of the process chain and the value chain. So you need to be able to scale. So the key is how do you build scaling markets? And to build scaling markets, you need to find the right planets and species with bank accounts. And so, as my previous several ventures in the space industry, and perhaps many in the audience will will recall with rolling eyes some of the attempts I made. Most of them went straight out into well, what can we do for this future market or this future business? And actually, there are it's again, it's not unequivocal. There are some plays out there now that are kind of doing that. There are
Mhm.
some very good plays, and they're moving the needle, and huge kudos to them. I couldn't figure that out myself. Perhaps maybe a decade or two too early in the time process. But what we did do was figure out, well, let's treat planet Earth as a just another celestial body. It's the third planet around the sun, and let's build our system to be environmentally agnostic. So operating our robots can operate in any gravity, any radiation field, any atmosphere or no atmosphere, tolerate a high degree of thermal variance and thermal cycling, and basically build the systems to be as solar system ubiquitous as possible. Now, we're not quite there yet, but the mature platform of the off-world robotic systems will have the range of species that can operate on land, in the sea and deep oceans for plastic and debris cleanup, in the atmosphere, in vacuum in space, and on planetary and asteroidal surfaces.
Wow, that's some amazing engineering, and I love how you refer to the robots as a species, so very, very interesting. So when you think back, is there anything that I guess you would have told yourself you should really have done this differently if you could go back in time?
Um, it's an interesting question because perhaps I you know you need to go through some of the mistakes, the so-called mistakes looking forward. You need to go through those events to have those learning experiences I spoke about previously, without which I wouldn't have been able to join some of the dots, and then the team that I have around me be able to execute to the world class excellence that they have been. Um,
Right.
if I was a little smarter and a little better at what I do, um, perhaps I wouldn't have been a successful entrepreneur. So you got to be just dumb enough to keep going, with enough grit not to give up. So,
There you go.
so you know, and then bring about true you know true excellence around you as you build the team. And as I said before, the success of Offworld is wholly due to the team
Mhm.
that we have. The lead entrepreneur tends to be just a catalyst, but it's the material around that really makes the interaction and the reactions. The catalyst just kicks things off.
Right. One of the things that you talked about earlier was about how basically you've bootstrapped the business. You haven't gone out to look for funding. Was that a decision that you made kind of as you went in, or was that just the way things played out?
Yeah, I mean, I'd raised venture capital before for previous projects, um, and the again, this is not a critique of the source of capital. In fact, we are now, 7 years into play. We are now starting to fundraise as we scale and accelerate. Um, but the challenge is basically this: high risk venture capital, which is speculatively based, has significant constraints from the limited partners to create a consistent pattern of entry
Mhm.
into new investments. The constraints of those entry points usually involve early stage, a 15, 20, 25% stake in the business at the early stages, and an investor objective of creating multiples of valuation to enable an exit. And there's usually two, three, four levels once you're on the merry-go-round that you have to go through, where each layer of investors in your A, B, and C rounds all want to have a corresponding level of return for the risk of their entry point.
Right.
The challenge is that the decisions necessary for that short-term expansion of valuation for your corporation do not necessarily match and correspond to the right strategic pathway for market growth, establishment, dominance, and ultimate success of the business. And so you can get a short-term rapid inflation of company cap at the detriment of long-term sustainability of the business and doing the right thing for the community you're trying to serve, and
Sure.
ultimately the civilization we're trying to build. And so it was a little bit of a decision, and really not every deep tech company building hardware and software. We are building a full stack. Not every company like ours has the luxury to be able to make that choice. Most
Mhm.
companies have to find early that early investment to take that risk alongside the founders as partners, investing partners, and that's why the venture capital community, basically earns their keep because
Mhm.
they are enabling so much innovation to occur.
Right.
That level of innovation, of course, then one of the other constraints is that, well, create a focused demonstration of innovation and capability, build on that, and then expand out gently as you go.
Right.
The Our premise was we're going to build the biggest all-encompassing solar system toolkit platform that we can imagine to undertake the entire gamut of industrial process for civilization building. And
Wow.
that sometimes sits well with investors as a vision, but it makes them very nervous if you're trying to implement that.
Right.
And so it turned out that a real driver we found was in the mining sector. We have, generally the mining sector is quite conservative, but we have amazing partners in the mining sector who have been with us from the start, who have shared their learnings on how to deal with rock, how to deal with material flow, how to deal with industrial processes, regulation, permitting, how to operate in a mine, and massive learnings that we wouldn't have been as successful as we are without that interactive partnership with those customers. And
Mhm.
and so we're extremely grateful to the companies. They're huge mining companies, deca-billion-dollar market cap companies that we've managed to get that learning from. And at the same time, as we're building our robots, we're getting very precise, robust feedback on what the requirements are, where our naiveties are, where we've burnt the fat of our assumptions as we go forward. And so having that customer driven opportunity to build a company without investment it's a bit of a baptism of fire, because the customers are even more demanding than investors, have less patience, because there is a business that is running on the clock.
Right.
But if you can survive those lessons, you come out as an awesomely stronger organization. And and now we are taking on investment. So I think that the best value of speculative investment, ironically, is where the speculation is minimal.
Mhm.
Literally, where the 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 most amount of risks are dismissed, and now where you're at is a point of scaling, growth, distribution, and copy and paste.
Yeah. Huh. Fascinating. Okay, so I want to end with one last question, and that is, if you were to make one prediction about the future of space, what would it be?
I think throughout the last 20,000 years of human migration and growth, um, the requirements have been an availability of energy, material resource, and transportation. For a lot of that period, we maybe used feet and horses. Um, but for the most part of our terrestrial planetary expansion, uh, that growth has really been in economic equivalence, i.e., it's been worthwhile.
Mhm.
Since the dawn of the space age, we have not had the economic equivalence on the transportation side, nor on the energy side, nor on the human labor side. It's very expensive to run an astronaut operating in space. It's very expensive to generate energy, and launch and transportation have been astronomical in price,
Mhm.
pun intended. Um, SpaceX and companies like that are creating new generations of launch vehicle that are slashing the cost of access to LEO. And I think this decade we should expect a seismic shift in the economics of access to space. There are companies building uh, thermal nuclear, solar power, and other energy sources that will enable us to have greater energy densities in space. for operations, and eventually those price points will come down. OffWorld is building the industrial robotic workforce, both for Earth and space-based civilization expansion, and breaking the vicious cycle of not being able to get humans up into space to build infrastructure necessary for humans to live up in space. So our objective is to have our robots so capable by having millions of robot hours of operations on terrestrial mining and construction developments, so that an astronaut can visit an off-world developed facility, walk in through the airlock, take off a helmet, and have running food and water, breathable air, ready to operate in any gravity field, in any environment. That's our objective to undertake within the decade.
Wow. Well, I can't wait. So we really look forward to seeing that all come to pass. And as it does, we'll want to have you back on to talk more about that.
Pleasure.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much for being here today, Jim. And we'll hopefully talk with you again very soon.
Thank you.